Man, I'm just having one of those days. Technology is kicking my butt, and I'm trying to get caught up on all my little side hobbies and whatnot. To welcome you back to the Looking Over Strange Terrain podcast. I believe this is episode 4. And today I'm going to be talking about the 18 Charlie course. But before I do that, you can follow me on X at underscore 2500 or 2025, on Facebook at Javi, on Instagram at Looking Over Strange Terrain. Yeah, I know it's not all kind of synced up in a way, but it is what it is. And over time, and if this becomes my full-time gig, I'll get this all cleaned up. Oh yeah, you can also find me on YouTube. I don't know why I always say that, but I always forget that. I'm at Looking Over Strange Terrain or the Lost Podcast on YouTube. So you can follow me on there too as well if you so like. And today we are going to be talking about the 18 Charlie course. That's the Special Forces Engineer course. I am an 18 Charlie, but I didn't start off that way after selection. And I'm going to kind of talk about what gets you to the military occupational portion of the Special Forces Qualification Course, the SFQC. And we're going to talk about, at least when I went through the Q course, what my experience was like. I'm not really sure what the glide path is today, but I'm pretty sure it's pretty much the same. Some of the POIs I'm going to talk about more than likely changed. If not, they're probably just still the same and they probably never changed. But the 18 Charlie, colloquially known as the 18 Charlie on the Special Forces team, is probably the busiest guy on the team that is an officer. So that said, let's go ahead and roll into it. So a Special Forces team is consisted of a captain, a master sergeant, and a bunch of NCOs, and a warrant officer and a bunch of NCOs. The captain is a 18 Alpha, and once he is done with the small unit tactics portion of the selection of the Q course, he will move on to the 18 Alpha course and learn everything there is to know about being a Special Forces officer. Whereas the 18 Zulu, who was the team sergeant, he started off as one of the NCOs on the team and later got the MOS, or Military Occupational Specialty Code 18 Zulu, once he had was promoted. You get promoted to that particular position. Then you have the 18 Fox. And again, this is another position on the team, like the rest of the positions I'm going to be talking about, that you have to come in as enlisted to perform that function on the team. And that the 18 Fox is the Special Forces intelligence officer. You have the Special Forces warrant officer. He's the chief of staff of the team. Next to the 18 Zulu and 18 Fox, most likely one of the most, the more experienced guys on the team. He, instead of becoming an officer, decided to go down the warrant path. So basically, if you want to you can become an officer from enlisted, right? But if you don't want to have to go through the selection process and the Q course all over again, from an enlisted to an officer, you can become a warrant officer, and you get more time on the team. You don't actually leave the Special Forces regiment. You're selected from, if there's slots available, you're selected from within the force to become a warrant officer back at your group. And then you go through the warrant officer pipeline and return back to either your battalion, sometimes team, or you just come back to group in general, which is the biggest plus, without having to go through the whole Q course all over again. But so you have the warrant officer, you have the commission officer, who's the 18 Alpha, the warrant officer, who is one of the guys that was enlisted and now he is commissioned as a warrant officer on the team. Then you have your 18 Zulu, who was one of the guys on the team who got promoted into his position. And then you have the 18 Alpha, or the 18 Fox, who's the intelligence sergeant. And that makes up the leadership of the team. of the Special Forces Operational Detachment, or ODA, leadership. After that, you have your 18 Bravo, who is your weapons sergeant, your 18 Charlie, who is your Special Forces Engineer Sergeant. You have your 18 Delta, Special Forces Medic. Then you have your 18 Echo, who is your Communications Sergeant, and that's it. And you have two Bravos, two Charlies, two Deltas, and two Echoes. You will have one Fox, one Warrant, one Zulu, and one Alpha, and all that makes 12 men. The 18 Charlie course is a course designed for you to understand the functionalities, the role of a Special Forces engineer, and what you will do on a day-to-day basis while deployed. Now, it really sounds, the Special Forces Engineer, MOS, sounds sexy as hell. And it is, you have a lot of fun and you gain a lot of knowledge. And it's one of these MOSs that if you were selected to become an 18 Charlie, or if you have desires to be an 18 Charlie, you have to be flexible, and you have to be able to manage your time, because what you do as a 18 Charlie affects everybody on the team. Everything from sleeping arrangements to travel to coordinating living arrangements. It's very complex. So I'm going to start off, how I'm going to break this down is I'm going to break it down to what you'll learn in school, what they don't teach you in school, and then life on the team, the reality of the job once you're there, and then life deployed. And that's going to be all based off of my experience. So when you go to your class, is going to be about 60 guys, 50 to 60 guys at most. And again, everybody comes from previous MOSs. There weren't a lot of guys in my class that were, combat engineers in the Army. There might have been onesies and twosies, but at the end of the day, most of these guys, it didn't matter what your MOS was. At the end of the day, nothing was going to give you an edge above anybody else. So the 18 Charlie, sole responsibility, and I'm going to boil it down because I don't have in front of me the exact what you will read from the recruiting page. You're responsible for construction and demolition, right? That's what they tell you. But at the end of the day, you're a supply guy that can blow things up. I say that jokingly, but when I get to that, you'll understand what I'm talking about. And there is a reason why your one of your primary duties is supply. So in the 18 Charlie course, one of the first things I went through was theater of operations construction. And basically what that means is how to build a fire base from the ground up. And the way we learned it was, first, you got a bunch of lectures on, this is what a fire base looked like. These are the different types of, this is where the terrain, how it should be this is how you select your terrain that you want to build this on. Then they're going to talk about fields of fire and building defenses and concertina wire and barbed wire and all this. And then it rolls right into construction, like the material, how to measure out board feet so you know how much material you need, how to do a bill of materials so that you know how much wood you need to calculate to build any particular structure, how much concrete you need, things like that. How many, at the time we didn't have HESCOs in our POI, but now I imagine the way they will, what they will do is teach you, by measuring out so much area, the area or perimeter of the terrain that you want to build on, how many HESCOs you need to do so. And then that same measurement or that same calculation would also take into effect of how much dirt will be necessary, is going to be needed to fill them up. And I don't need math for that. I just know it's going to be a lot of dirt, right? But if you we're contracting out this, you're hiring a local to do this for you, you'll be able to know how to calculate that out so he doesn't overcharge you. And a lot of times the locals don't. They have it pretty broken down to how much things cost, so that they can make some money, and at the same time you keep going back to them for services. So there you have it. You will sit there and you'll learn how construction works and how to be a construction site manager, and from there you will get your first group project, and it'll break you down into 12-man teams. And the way I remember it is they said they gave you blueprints. So you're going to learn how to read blueprints, and they're going to say, all right, measure out how much part one of your test will be, how much wood you would need to build say a 20-foot by 20-foot classroom. That's including roof, and then there's the roof, the flooring, all the material needed for concrete, all the measurements for wiring, in the type of lighting you're going to put in, as well as the measurements for piping and in the whole 9 yards. So so you're going to get a crash course on construction and planning for it, because at the end of the day, I'm going to talk about it. You're going to be the guy who's going to be purchasing this equipment, all this material, or you're going to be putting in request for it to be purchased and it be shipped out to you. So the way they did it for us is they gave us, hey, you're going to build this 20 by 20 foot classroom, for example. That's including roofing, flooring, desk, wood for desk, as well as electrical wiring, plumbing, the whole 9 yards. And with that, once you completed the test and you passed, they checked you off and they said, all right, here's balsa wood. And what they showed you how to cut the wood and everything, but you would organize yourselves into little teams of guys who are measuring and cutting, guys who are measuring, guys who are cutting, and then you got the guys who are building the framing, and then you got the guys putting it all together, the team that's putting it all together. And it was like an assembly line. And you did it with balsa wood at the beginning. So we had these little 20-inch by 20-inch classrooms, and the way we did it, it was like a cutaway. So you saw the framing, but it was like a partially built little model of the classroom that you were going to then build in real life. So while we were doing that, and that took like a day or two to do, and it was really neat, because then it gave us an idea of how things were built and how things were put together and assembled. And then those same teams that did the measuring, the cutting, the assembly, and the putting together the bigger pieces would then be the same guys when we went out to the range to build our classroom for that class. They would go out, and then that's what we did. We did exactly that, but at a larger scale. And then, of course, like I said before, we went out there and we went and we built these. We took that model of the classroom we built with balsa wood, and then built that same class room with electrical and everything else, the desk and everything, out at the range. And I want to say we tore it down at the end so that the next class can do the same thing. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. I never did construction in my life. I swung a lot of hammers. During this time period, my wife and I had just bought our first house. So I was doing a lot of projects around the house. So this taught me how to knock some of those things out. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. Once we completed the construction phase of it, we also went into concrete. I believe we built like a couple of, if you ever gone to basic training and you have those pits for the grenades, and it was like a U-shaped cinder block wall with some dirt, as a barrier. Yeah, we built a couple of those out at the range, and then we tore those down at the end of the class, so the next class can turn around and do the same thing over again. But that gave us all experience, So we had to build the footers of concrete, and then we took bricks, and they taught us how to brick and mortar, which was really, really cool. I didn't really know everything that went into that, but broke it all down. And then, of course, these are all tested both in, they taught you the class, then you took took a written test, and then you applied what you learned in the class to build the actual structures. And we built a bunch of those. And then I think some other class did some repairs on some things. And yeah, it was really neat. So after you do your construction, you go into what they call calc in place. And calc in place is where you learn all the different explosives. You learn how to build time systems. You learn everything about the explosive chain, how to put explosives together, and then you were tested on the calc in place before you went out to the range. And this was one of the more difficult portions of the 18 Charlie course, because it was math heavy, as well as the construction was math heavy. This was like math heavy on steroids. And it wasn't really complicated math, but it was things that you had to pay attention to detail in your calculations. And you learn how to, you get your little GTA card, and it tells you what the RE factors are of each explosive you're working with. And then you just went from there. And you get your test, and then the hands-on portion after the written test had to deal with, properly knowing how to build and construct an explosive safely, how to handle and safeguard explosives in a field environment. And then we got out and you placed them on targets that were either like scraps of old structures or old vehicles. Some of the items we blew up a minivan. We got a chance to blow up a lot of decommissioned artillery pieces. And that was real important for us to learn how to do, because we may come across those items out in the real world. But we learned how to blow up steel, which was my favorite. We got it down to a science where we could cut a piece of steel and it would look like you took a cutting torch to it, and it was just that precise with very little scarring. And you'd be surprised what you could do with plastic explosives and how effective it is for cutting steel. After the calc in place portion, you're going to do identifying munitions and landmines. And this was difficult because you got away from the math, and now you had to really focus on being able to visually identify landmines and different types of munitions, and commit them to memory, because you will get a randomized test for every person, and you had to be able to identify whether a grenade was either from Czechoslovakia or Romania or Russia or China, wherever the case may be. And then you have to, and there was very little things, in a lot of ways, those munitions were very similar to one another. And there was just little nuanced things that you can look at and be like, all right, that's an Italian mine versus this is a Chinese mine or a Russian mine or whatever the case may be. But it was I found that to be one of the hardest tests I've took in a Charlie course, more so than the calc in place portion and construction. I'm pretty good at math. If I know if I know the formulas, I'm pretty good at math. When it came to the munitions, I got a first time go on all my tests in the Charlie course, but I don't think I got 100% on the munition and landmine and identification. Once you complete that portion, you go into obstacles and building obstacles, concertina wire, and the different types of obstacles, whether it be wire, dirt, concrete, whatever. And you learn how to build them either via, explosives or how to construct them, which was really cool. It wasn't all that sexy or exciting because no one really likes to pound pickets or anything like that. But yeah, you're going to pound some pickets. The obstacles, you go into improvised explosives. A lot of times you won't find, like, for instance, you might find yourself deployed and you may need Bangalore torpedoes, for instance. And basically a Bangalore torpedo is a piece of PVC pipe filled with C4 with a cone on the end of it. You might have seen it in Saving Private Ryan, and on the end you can stick your initiating system and shove it into the dirt underneath some wired obstacles, and then you have a time fuse and you set it off and it blows up, and it creates a path for you to get in. Well, say for instance, you don't have that because you're deployed to Africa and the supply can't get you there, but you have pickets, or you either have some type of channeling type metal that you can fill with C4 and use in the same capacity. And that's what the Bengal, and they teach you how to build those things. My favorite demolition charge that we built was a fugas a fugas explosion, which basically it was just, some drums of diesel and some other items put together. And what makes it effective basically is like creating napalm. I did it once on a deployment. It didn't turn out as effective as I wanted it to, but essentially it turns the diesel into gel and you send it flying forward and it burns everything. Well, when we did it in the Q course, in the 18 Charlie course, this stuff stayed on fire forever. And we had to stay out there until it all went out. And then we set it off in the rain, and it was like a North Carolina, Fort Bragg, I hate you rain, where the water went down the crack of your butt, and you knew at that point that life really sucked. And what made it cool was the fact that when we set that explosion off, it went off and it stayed burning in the rain. That was really, really cool. So you get an opportunity to learn a lot of things. I really don't want to talk about I don't want to spoil it for people who are interested in going, because it just really, I didn't like a lot of this stuff I didn't know about because no one really talked about it. But when you're there and you get the experience and you walk away saying to yourself, I can't believe I get paid to do this. And it was a good time. So you fast forward through all that, and the next phase we went into, after you were done with the range, you went back to the classroom and you learned about what you call target analysis. And again, I'm not going to go a lot into this because there's a lot of information to put out about target analysis, but you learn a lot about the infrastructure of the United States, which is pretty much the same across the board no matter where you go. That's power plants, roadways, bridges, and that target analysis rolled right into bridges, where we learned how to build bridges, not colloquially, but like physical bridges, like a Bailey Bridge. It's a military bridge that comes in a kit, so to speak, and then you put this bridge together over a small stream or a river. But bridging operations was a big thing. And again, that was another tough, a lot of these things I'm talking about weren't easy tests to take in the 18 Charlie course, but they're very doable. They're easy to pass. They weren't easy in the sense that you just take a 1 hour class and you at the end of the week you take a test and you hope you pass. No, there was a lot of information put out, and talking about drinking from a fire hose. That's exactly what you were doing when you're going through these courses, especially in the Special Forces course. You're constantly getting force fed a ton of information, and it's usually in a short period of time. And then you're, being tested on it quite rapidly while it's still fresh in your mind. So, but target analysis led into bridging led into your culmination exercise, which I don't even remember what happened during that culmination exercise, but I'm pretty sure it had to do with small unit tactics and blowing stuff up. But yeah, that's the life of an 18 Charlie going through the Q course. But what they don't teach you is what the administrative responsibilities are when you get to the team. And that's the next part I'm going to talk about. The next time you'll start doing, for me, I went from the 18 Charlie course to a big exercise called a culmination exercise, where all the MOSs got together. That's the officers, and all the enlisted get together in 12-man teams. And because you won't have a warrant, a fox, or a team sergeant, one guy, usually the highest ranking guy from one of the MOSs. It really didn't matter who it was, as long as you were the highest ranking. You were the Zulu. Then you had, a random guy on top of his 18 series duties was the Fox and the Intel guy, and then everybody else kind of filled in the rest. But again, at this point, everybody was on the same sheet of music. Now the way the Q course is structured is a little bit different. I think language school is filled in before you go to Robin Sage at some point, whereas when I went through, language school was after I went through Robin Sage. But yeah, you do your Robin Sage, you do your language. I did my language school, and then I went to SEER school, and I was, sent off to 3rd Special Forces Group. So when I got the 3rd group, I was assigned to my team. I was in 3rd Battalion, Alpha Company, and at the time, the team number was 372. So if you're not familiar with the way a Special Forces team is, it's pretty simple. So back in that time period, when you had 3 numbers, the first number was the group. So my team number was 372. The second number at that time, when it was just 3 numbers, was 7. So if I met any guy from like 7th group and he said he was on 770, I knew he was on the B team in 3rd Battalion. Why? Because 1st Battalion's team numbers started with 1. So that second number would be 1 through 3. If it was 2nd Battalion, it would be 3 through 6 or 4 through 6. And if it was 3rd Battalion, it would be 7 through 9. So I was in 3rd group, 3rd Battalion, so 7. And then the last number kind of told you within the company what type of team you were. I'm not going to go into that because it really doesn't matter. Sometimes that varies throughout group as to what that second number team is. But today, most Special Forces units have 4 numbers, with the first number starting off with the group, the second number starting off with the battalion, and the third will tell you what company that particular team is on. So 372 turns into 3312. So I was in 3rd group, 3rd battalion. Because I was an Alpha company, that would be a 1, and then that 2 designated with the type of team I was on at the time. So 3312. So if you said I was on 3336, I knew you were in 3rd Battalion, 3rd Special Forces Group, 3rd Battalion, Charlie Company on that, whatever that team specialty was at the time. So that's how the team broke out. So I got to 372, and life on the team is like this. If you're the Charlie, you do Charlie work, and you're basically the steward of the property book. And the property book is a book of all the items that the operational detachment commander is signed for, and you manage that book. Within that book, you will get to become very intimate with every item in the team room. If it's on the property book, you know about it. If it comes off the property book, you know about it. And then you keep the captain informed. So this is where your organizational and time management skills come into play. You have to be able to, and every 18 Charlie did it a little bit different, but we mostly did it the same. Some guys had methods that were a little, chaotic, but most of us pretty much was really cut and dry. Basically, you would do is that property book will be broken down as one complete book, but then you have to go through it and say, all right, this is the 18 Bravo equipment, and this is everything they're signed for. So you take everything that the 18 Bravos are responsible for and put it on a 2062, and then they will send hand receipted from the commander to them. Same with the 18 Charlies, 18 Echoes, and the 18 Foxes and Deltas. And some guys have more equipment than the others. I think the Bravos usually have the most stuff. That's because they includes weapons, nods, thermal sights, all the peripherals for your rifles. 18 Charlies mostly had compasses and GPSs and demo bags and all the BII that comes with that. And the Echoes had all the radios and computers, and the medics had a library. I think they had the least amount. The Echoes and the Fox The intelligence sergeant had the least amount of stuff. Usually, like the Fox will have like a camera and a computer and a few other items, whereas the Echo will have all the radios and, all the laptops. I said that before. But the Deltas will have a library and a lobster cooker, like a sterilizer. That's all I can remember that the Deltas had that I really had to account for, because most of their stuff is, things that you throw away. But then you have to learn speaking of that, you have to learn all the different classes of supply as well, like class 1, class 2, which was major end items. Class 3 was like, I don't know, I think it was oils. And class 4 was your construction equipment. Class 5 was your, ammunition. Class 6 was food items, I guess. Stuff that you go get at the class 6, alcohol, stuff like that. But that wasn't on your property book. You got class 8 and 9, batteries, whatever the case may be. I forget. I'm pretty sure I'm pretty close on most of the classes, but I can't remember everything. It's been a while. I don't have to remember it anymore. But anyway, you have to know all your different classes of material. That way you could spend money to buy and plus up your team with items that they need. So I think class 2 was like uniforms and stuff. I might be wrong. But anyway, but yeah, so, you're responsible for all that, especially when you're deployed downrange, because it looks way different when you're downrange than it does when you're in garrison. Because some of those things you don't have to worry about in garrison, but you do have to worry about when you're deployed in a combat environment. But anyway, so you go back to, the class of supply, property book, each MOS having their own property book. And the way it worked was the Bravos were responsible for maintaining everything on their property book and I ensured that the documentation was done correctly. And then most of the times, like, they know how to do it correctly. And that wasn't the issue. It was just staying on top of it. And so I don't have to worry about what the Bravos do with their equipment. I just got to make sure when the commander wants to do an inventory that all the equipment's there. You're also, and then every MOS was required to annotate their own shortages. And so a shortage basically was, say, for instance, you had, and the best example I can use is night vision goggles. You have like these little lenses, sacrificial lenses that always get lost that we never had. Every set of nods, according to the serial number, it was supposed to have so many in its bag. So when you did a layout for a command inventory, if those items were missing, the commander knew he had to replace them. But if a number of items got to a point where it was costing the unit a lot of money, the outgoing commander, was held responsible for that. I've never seen a commander have to pay out of their pocket. I've heard the threats of it happening, but I've never seen it actually come into play. But anyway, so the relationship you have with the team sergeant, the 18 Charlie has with the team sergeant and the commander, is very, very tight, because at the end of the day, the 18 Charlie is going to get you from point A to point B and back. And so amongst all the responsibilities you have on a team as far as property, you had a bunch of other things that weren't so sexy, like field sanitation. Sometimes you were the team NBC, NCO. On top of that, you were a jump master, doing jump master responsibilities. In addition to that, you're running demo ranges. And oh yeah, by the way, if you're a senior guy on a team now, for you've been on a team 3+ years, you're a senior guy, and there's a chance that if you had a senior, he's moved on, and now you're the senior, and now you're picking up a junior, and now you're mentoring him and developing him to be your replacement for when you leave. And so on top of that, you're still trying to fight for schools, whether, I'm going to get into that in a second, like whether, because you're going to get all the not so sexy schools probably up front, and then turn around and get a bunch of sexy schools. So let's talk about the not so sexy schools. I mentioned field sanitation was a class I had to go to, the NBC, to be an NBC guy for our team. Another one was I was an air movement officer for our team, which meant that, when you just can't put things on an aircraft. They have to be packaged a certain way. They have to be safeguarded in a certain way. They have to be in certain types of containers. You can't have metal contact. And a lot of times when you deploy forward, you don't have those guides there to support you in that. So you become that guy, kind of like a jack of all trades and a master of none. And in the long run, you become a very belligerent, upset person. I think I was rather tame compared to like my senior. He was grumpy, hence the nickname we gave him was Grumpy. And I didn't understand why he was so mad all the time until I was in his shoes, because I was doing a lot of the minor things. And then when I became the senior, I picked up all his responsibilities. And oh man, that I understood why he was an alcoholic. But anyway, yeah, so you'll get a lot of not so sexy schools that will help the team out. But if you do well at your job, you'll then get the sexy school. So that being said, if you're not Ranger qualified or haven't been to Sapper school prior to getting to the team and there's a slot that opens, knock that out. That really does help the team. It helps your career. Not only does it help your career, but it helps the team out so that you don't have to worry about that before you get to group. You can just, you can get that knocked out, and all it'll do is just make you a better soldier at the end of the day, and also provide you with some leadership that you probably didn't help you out leadership wise that you probably didn't get while you're in a Q course, and because those are all leadership schools. And then it's good to have some candy on your shoulder when you show up to the unit and you don't look like, a cherry like me. I had my long tab, my air assault badge and airborne badge, and that was about it, But so yeah, knock out what you can for schools before you get to the team if you can. That's if you can. There's nothing wrong with showing up to the team and not having gone to Ranger school or Sapper team, Sapper school. They'll probably send you right away if you really want to go. Just make sure you're ready. And that's what's really important, that you're ready to go mentally and physically. But also, if you get a chance to go to Halo school, knock yourself out. I didn't get a chance to do that. But I tell you, one of the things I'm glad I did early was go to Jumpmaster school and knock that out. And it was a great time, and I learned a lot, and I loved doing, the best place in the stick is to be the Jumpmaster. So, all right. So you've been on the team for a while. What did I talk about? So where I'm at here. Yeah. So you knock out your schools. So life deployed as a 18 Charlie. Life deployed as a 18 Charlie is very, very busy. So from the time you leave or the time you get your mission and you start mission planning to the time you get home and the moment you have gotten accountability of every last piece of equipment, you are busy, like extremely busy. I cannot tell you how busy you will be, because if you're on an ODA, I'm not talking like on the CRIF or one of these specialty units. I'm talking about if you're on an ODA, a special operational detachment that is deploying to a J set, or you're going downrange into the combat zone, you will be busy from the moment you get your mission to the moment you get home, and you really don't stop working until every last piece of equipment has been accounted for. So what does that look like? So you'll get your receipt of the mission, and you start depending on what you're doing, you might start the military decision making process with the team, where you go into isolation, and from that point on, you are getting everything, all your ducks in a row. Everything from coordinating movement of equipment or getting forklifts out to your team room, to where you've built, to get the palleting, to bring your palleting materials, putting your pallets together, documenting everything that's going on in the deployment, everything that's staying back from the deployment. Once you do that, you're making arrangements of, with the battalion to move that equipment from your team room out to a staging area to be inspected. Then you're out there getting it inspected. And once it's inspected, you're watching that stuff go out to the flight line. And once the Air Force has possession of it, then you can go back home. And this is like, I'm talking about, this is, I just went through the whole, I kind of condensed that part, but that's, there's train ups, there's demo training that you have to do with the team. There's getting stay-go list, things that are going to stay behind, things that are going to go forward together, and then passing those up to the battalion and making sure that the property book documentation matches what's staying behind and what's going forward. And then once you do that, you got everything on the pallet ready to go. You've inspected it. Every box has been inventory. Every box has a inventory list of what's inside of it. You have a copy, your Bravos, and every guy on the team has a copy of it. And oh yeah, by the way, they have their personal items. And then, oh yeah, everybody on the team wants gym equipment, so they have to bring the whole gym onto the pallet. And you're doing all this stuff for the team, and you're trying to keep yourself busy, and they're keeping you busy, and you're either loved or you're either loved or you're hated, and it's crazy. And then you're on top of that, you're trying to balance out home life and taking your kids to ball games and vacationing and all this. And then finally you show up to the green wrap. And for me, that whole process, I just wanted to get the deployment over with, so I would kiss my wife and I wouldn't let her hang out with me. I regret that to this day, but that's the way life was for me at the time. Because I just had so much going on in my head and trying to keep track of for the deployment. But anyway, so you get downrange to wherever you're going, and you have to make sure you've already coordinated. You have a plan for how your stuff is getting picked up, where it's getting shipped to, and then you have to you have to inspect your load and make sure that the seals that you put on to the pallet that hadn't been broken, and you want to make sure. Then you have to lay out all your equipment and do an inventory, make sure you have everything. And once you have everything, you have that, then you go into whatever your mission set is. And then you spend the rest of the time. Sometimes you have to start off from scratch. So let's say you start off from scratch and, the information you got was, hey, we're going to fall into a structure that's already been built or a house that's present, and now you have to go around and make sure everything works properly, identify anything that needs to be fixed. Sometimes you're fixing it, sometimes you're hiring somebody out to come fix it. Sometimes it's better to hire a local to fix local issues. You go in there, and if you're not smart on how things are done in a particular country, just going in and trying to do it the way the Americans would do it would probably be the wrong answer. So it's always best to consult with the local, and normally you'll have an interpreter or a cultural advisor to help you out through that process and ensuring that you know what you're doing, or ensure that you don't get yourself hurt. So once everybody's fat, dumb, and happy, you have people have a place to sleep, they have a place to exercise, and they got a place to eat. Most of the time, the ODA will just go on to autopilot, and then you can go about what your mission is. But in the meantime, you have to be ready to react to contact if the situation arises, like, electrical goes out. There was an instance where we're in Central Asia, in Kyrgyzstan, and the guys brought baby wipes to wipe their bums, right? And I had no problem with that. But in that country, you don't flush toilet paper down the toilet. And these guys were just, they were, wiping their bums and throwing the baby wipes down the toilet. And eventually, very quickly, actually, about 2 or 3 weeks into this trip, the plumbing backed up, and then all the sewage came up through the showers, and it was just a mess, right? I was on the top floor, so I wasn't affected by it. And then two, I knew this was a case. And I gave them little trash cans to put next to the toilet, so they can just, in plastic bags, once they're done wiping their bum, just throw it in there and that. But no, they insisted on flushing their baby wipes down the toilet. Well, those pipes weren't made for that. And guess what, man? We had to go into that. We had to find where the sewage dumped into, and we had to snake it out. And yeah, it was a big clump of, it was like a 5-yard long compact tube of baby wipes come flowing out, and it was the grossest thing I ever had to deal with on a deployment. But yeah, those are things that you have to deal with, and be prepared to, to fix as an 18 Charlie. But during that same time period, I had to do assessments on some of the training areas, and they were building the shoot house, and the shoot house, I actually had an opportunity to help design a shoot house, but I had to go in a shoot house and see where I can make improvements. And then I was allocated money to hire a welder to put, make some shooting traps. And I got money to, buy those big rubber blocks so that, the guys can get more training out of their gunshots, out of their targetry. So yeah, you'll come across situations where you have to come up with some really creative solutions to some really complex problems. And for whatever reason, it just becomes what it is. So that was the fun part about being an 18 Charlie. Doing demo was even the best part, and when you're deployed, say for instance in the combat zone, you get an opportunity to work with demolitions in an environment that's not really an unrestricted environment. So you have to take what you know safety wise and apply it to everything that you do, and make sure that whatever you're experiencing with, that you're doing it safely as per how you were taught how to do it in the Q course. And you get to experiment with some things. And one of the things that you have to, there's when an instructor tells you in a Q course, hey, stay away from or be aware of this particular thing. Pay attention to that, because that's based off of experience. Like, so for instance, in the munitions and mines portion of the Q course, where you do an identification, they tell you when we get to the Chinese portion, don't mess with Chinese grenades. And there's a very, very specific reason for this. And it has to do with the Chinese aren't really good at marking how their fuses work. And there's no rhyme or reason as to what they'll throw a fuse on. And they just say, so if you see a Chinese anything, just blow it in place and leave it alone. Well, there was a guy in our group that I'm pretty sure he got the same block of instruction that he got, and he picks up this Chinese grenade. He was in my company, and he pulls the pin, and before he even throws it, it blows up, and he lost his hand. The moral of the story is, don't mess with Chinese munitions, period. Just blow it up in place. And I say that because you're going to be in places where, even though you're not operating in China, you might be in Africa, you might be in Europe, and you might come across a Chinese grenade, and they're very common. I'm just going to say that because the Russians and the Chinese use the same looking munitions. They just do different things with them. And so with that being said, listen to what the instructors say, take note. If they stomp their foot, do what they do, they will say, do not do this, or this will happen, and pay attention. Just make sure you're doing that. But like I was getting at is, you get an opportunity to develop SOPs that you won't normally get to develop at a range on the post that you're stationed. Like for instance, I'm pretty sure I didn't come up with this on my own, but I would take tobacco cans and I would fill them up with C4 and use those as door charges. And I had a buddy of mine who would, and I'll have him on the podcast in the future, he would take a satchel charge, and I think satchel charges had 16 blocks of C4 and he would carry that with him because it had 16 blocks of C4. And, you hear this joke and calc in place, P for plenty. And no. Calculation and placement of charges. So you're going to calculate how much material you need and the placement of charges. And what's important to know about the placement is knowing how to properly place a demo charge can prevent you from carrying a lot of demo with you. And here's the story. So he would carry the 16 blocks on every mission. That's 1.25 pounds. Multiply that by 16. You got the weight. Let's say it's 22 pounds. Then I would carry 6 snuff cans of C4 with a pigtail on it of deck cord. That weighed maybe 2 pounds at most. I made him a bet. I said, hey, I can blow up more stuff with one dip can charge than you can with all that you carry. And for example, We were on this mission down in Gardez, and we came across this, we're with the 6 Kandak Commandos, and we came across this cache. It was a suicide vest, a RPG, AK-47, a motorcycle, and a bunch of other stuff. I was tasked with getting rid of it. So with one dip can charge, I threw it on there, put a time fuse on it, blew it all up. It was all about placement. Nothing was left. Everything was destroyed. Well, he saw that. He was sold. So, fast forward a couple of weeks and we're on this other mission. I got him sold on the dip can charge. So now we got like a whole bunch of these. He carries like, 6 or 7 of them, and I carry, the other bunch. And we got separated. He's working, he finds a cache, and it was a huge cache. I don't really remember how big it was. And I'm like 100 meters away in a building guarding these dudes that we captured. And I had my dog with me. And I catch the last fire in the hole, because when you blow something up, you're going to say fire in the hole, fire in the hole, fire in the hole 3 times over the radio and out loud. And I catch the last one. And as I'm hearing it, my dog, who's tethered to me, he pulls me into this door jam. I was standing in a doorway of a compound, and that explosion goes off. Boom. And as my dog yanks me in, this big old chunk of, of that building that my buddy just blew up, zips past me. I'm like, holy crap. And it was like a really close call. And so I was like, what the heck just happened? He goes, dude, I just blew up he beat me. It was like a huge cache. I think it was like, a couple 100 pounds. And I was like, well, how much demo do you use? And he was like, I just used one dip can. I go, what did you do? And he goes, well, he found an Italian mine that was actually full functioning Italian mine. And he placed that dip cam charge on top of that Italian mine, and then placed that mine on top of everything else. And it just blows everything up, and it just destroys this whole building. It was awesome. Anyway. So yeah, it's all about placement. And I tell you that story because not only did I sell him on taking less demo on missions, but I also, because I was a senior about this point, I was 3 years as senior in SF. We were the same rank. I just, I had more seniority to him, and it was something I taught him. And he was like, man, that you have me totally sold on this. And so, yeah. So from that point on, he reduced the amount of demo he would take on mission, and but that same dip charge ended up biting me in the butt a few years later. It was my last mission. It was my last deployment in Afghanistan, and we were in Kunduz. We're, conducting this raid. We're hitting a bunch of these places, and we're in this village. My team sergeant has half the team going down, one end of the village. I have the second half, and I'm going up with the Europeans and the European soft forces, and he has a bunch of the commandos, and we're just kind of racing to the end. Right. And we get to a point where we're moving too fast, and we're kind of losing control of my element. And so I slowed it down, and we started being a little more deliberate. And I'm not saying that we lost control. It was just, we were getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. So I slowed it down. We slowed the pacing down a little bit, and we knocked on this door and we were like, we got to blow it and get inside the compound. So I placed so Afghan exterior compound doors are kind of recessed into these big, thick walls. And so it was a metal door, and I had some hydrogel on the backside of this dip can charge, and I put it on. And I also had a little refrigerator magnet just underneath that as a backup. And then I also had I had some duct tape or 100-mile-an-hour tape with tacks. So if it ever hit like a wooden door and it was having trouble sticking, I can stick the tacks in, and then the charge will stay. So I had all these redundancies built into this dip can charge, but I felt like the magnet, along with the refrigerator magnet plus the hydrogel, is good enough on this metal door. So I stuck it onto the door, fed it back, made sure the line was good. I was under nods at the time. It was dark, and my radio antenna had caught a part of the charge, and it fell. But the way it fell, the charge looped back, and it was off behind me. But the cord was long enough that it went back into the recess of the doorway. So it looked like under nods that it was still attached to the door when it really was like out flapping in the wind behind us. And I pulled the initiator, and yeah, my headphones came off my ears and it rung my bell. Fortunately, nobody was hurt, but it really rung my bell. And I learned a huge lesson of double checking my charge. And then I was pretty confident, but under nods, you can't do that. You have to double check your charge. So another part of your demo training that they really don't cover a lot on, you get like a small block of training, is urban use of explosives in an urban environment under CQB. Yeah, you'll learn how to build the charges. You'll learn what charges to use on what to breach what type of material, but you won't do a lot of it until you go to range 37, where you're going to learn a lot about that. By the way, I've never been there, but most of the things I learned were from guys that went on breaching charges. And so that's where I got all my expertise on that. So yeah, so that's the Charlie course. That's the life of a 18 Charlie on a team. Life as an 18 Charlie downrange, you're going to be busy. You like those water purification and NBC courses come into play when you need to dig a well, when you need to take showers. It may not seem like a fun thing to do. Yeah, you don't get a cool little badge for doing it, but at the end of the day, it keeps you safe and it keeps the guys on the team happy. I didn't go into managing workers because I don't know what the next conflict's going to look like for SOF. But while I was in Afghanistan, we would have workers. And the reason why I didn't get a lot of sleep is because if I wasn't on mission, I was, training. If I wasn't training, I was managing workers. And that meant I would sometimes have, every day for the deployment, I would have to go out to the front gate, get them in, give them their taskings, and then do all the things that we were, SF guys do. One of the things I forgot to talk about was you are in charge of creating the cross-load plans for patrols, whether they be foot and vehicles. So I was in charge of making sure all the vehicles had fuel. Well, I take that back. I was in charge of making sure we have access to fuel, food, and water. And a lot of times when you're on your fire base, you will have the food, you have the fuel, but you might have to go somewhere to get the fuel, and you'll have the food and the water. The Bravos on the team were responsible for making sure all the trucks and all the guys on the team had ammo. When it came to uniforms, when it came to gear and all that, that was the Charlie's responsibility to make sure everybody had it. I didn't have to check to see if they were wearing it. I just had to make sure that they had access to those items. And normally you're in charge of, when a guy comes to the team, you'll make a hand receipt and give him all his team gear, internal team gear, and that's the team gear that he has to turn back in when he leaves. And a lot of times it's like gloves, like fast roping gloves. You may or may not keep those. It all depends on your Charlie, right? Compasses, strobe lights, things of that nature. But if the guy had his own stuff and he didn't want to take it from you, he didn't have to. And that's just the way it goes. Unless the team sergeant said, no, you will sign for it. The team sergeant never got into that. If the guy told me to go F off, I just F'd off, and I didn't even take it personal. I just whatever. All right. It is what it is. But you were responsible for the load plan and making sure everybody carried equal weight. Nobody carried more than the other unless they absolutely had to. The Deltas were in charge of making sure on the trucks everybody had, first aid, multiple IFACs, tourniquets, stuff of that nature. And he was really responsible for making sure that we were all trained on that, just like the 18 Charlies were responsible for making sure everybody on the team knew how to handle demo charges. But for the most part, you didn't have a guy go rogue, and, you didn't have your 18 Bravo go into the 18 Charlie, demo shed and start building stuff, not without the Charlie being there. And nor did you go into the Bravo's armor's room and start dinking around with weapons unless he knew about it. Yeah, that was life on an ODA as an 18 Charlie. You were just busy, and every time you think you had a moment free, it was swallowed up with time that you didn't have. So, but you did your best to cut out time for yourself, and that's what's really important. Well, hey, that's it for today. I'll have more coming at you. I've just been real busy with work. I did the Dopey Challenge, which was a 5K, 10K, half and full marathon a couple weeks ago. And that hit me pretty hard. I ended up in the hospital after that. But I'd like to thank the guys out at Camp McCall for helping me out while I was out there for work. I really do appreciate it. And I do have interviews in the hopper. Right now, life has been busy at work, and I got another work trip coming up next week. So I'm trying to knock out these podcasts in between, and I'm going to have more coming at you. This was a request from a guy from on YouTube asking to talk about more about the 18 Charlie course and what to expect. So there you have it. All right. Until next time, Dale Presso Liber.